Um, because our audience, of course, they know who is Roger Norrington, but maybe what happened in the past, after trembles of the early music movement, when you went and conquered the Beethoven.
Right. Yes, I suppose it was interesting because early music was really about, really early music, Gesualdo and Palestrina and Monteverdi and so on. I mean, it was thought of as a 15th century, 16th century, 17th century. When it crept into the 18th century, people were quite surprised, that Mozart could be played differently. But of course, Beethoven is the beginning of the real repertoire.
Yes.
Beethoven symphonies have been played ever since they were first performed in the early part of the 19th century, first few years of the 19th century, and so it sort of suddenly came to me that having heard a little bit of Haydn and Mozart, that Beethoven must be played the same way as that. It must be like that. It must not be very slow and kind of early. It isn't early Wagner. It's late Bach and Haydn, so to speak. And suddenly I realized, looking at the scores with what I'd learnt about Haydn and Mozart, I just heard a different piece, a different piece from Klemperer that I'd been singing under in the choir, with this huge. I mean, it was wonderful, his Beethoven. There are many wonderful Beethovens, but there's only one Beethoven, and that's the speed at which he wrote the music. What he wanted, he was very clear about what he wanted. So, in a way, it was quite easy just to do what it said, but it was also extremely dangerous. And above all, I think it had to be fun. It had to be exciting. We didn't want to be grand. We didn't want to be grandiose. What the Germans call Wehrvoll, kind of spiritually. No, Beethoven is kind of more like a game, more like a fantastic game, and we wanted to bring that out. So it was a very, very exciting time, and of course very creative. You had to be creative because no one had done it before, so you couldn't say, well, I'll do it like that but a bit faster, or I'll do it like that but a bit slower. You had to say, what is happening here and what do we want?
And that changed a lot. That changed many things in the music world, to my opinion at least. Nothing was considered sacred anymore, if I may use the expression. You can approach Beethoven differently, means you can approach
anybody.
Schumann different, you can approach Wagner.
Yes, and that's in fact what we did. I mean, I had moved, from Schütz to Bach and Handel, and then to Haydn and Mozart and to Beethoven.
Which was safe.
With the sort of moving, But I mean, after Beethoven, then I thought, well, what's next? What happens next? Who? And so we played Rossini, and we found that was quite different from what we thought. It was much more classical, and we of course wanted to hear what Mendelssohn would sound like. And again, you look at everything. You look at the instruments, you look at the seating, the number of players, the sound that they make. Were they using vibrato? No, apparently not. And the speed of the music and what it was all about. Why did he write those symphonies? Etc. And so each time you just move forward through to Berlioz, Mendelssohn, and Rossini, all around the same date, and on to Schumann. And exactly the same, you ask the same questions. What speed does he want it? Or how big was the orchestra? If the strings were more than a certain size, then of course they doubled the woodwind. Yes, did they? Yes, they did. And so that's what we do. For instance, we have two sizes of orchestra this week. We have the Leipzig Gewandhaus size with 8 first violins, 8 second violins, and 8 woodwind, and we have the summer festival size that Schumann and Mendelssohn and Beethoven were all used to, of 14 or 12, 14 or 16 first and second violins, and 16 woodwind. Because if you have more strings, you have to have more wind. The horns can usually manage because they're quite loud instruments, and the brass, you don't need to double those so much, although some people did double the horns. So every aspect was important. You know, the score, what the score meant, because it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing now as it did then. On all those features, you take them all and you look at them completely dispassionately and decide how to, and then you put it together, and then you hear what's there, and you add your own fantasy, you know, your own ideas to it.
From that, I kind of come to the idea that it was not only that it changed the audible, the music, which maybe then copied by others, but it introduced different questions to ask for the performers.
Right.
So this revolution that the early music movement and the Beethoven symphonies you recorded actually forced everybody to make new kinds of questions.
Good.
To penetrate new kind of way, new angles to the periods. And
that's a nice idea, because I think music teaching is very much based on tradition.
Yes.
And for a very good reason, because music is so difficult to do well. There are so many things that are difficult, intonation, ensemble, just playing the instrument at all, that if you can get it together and in tune, then that's great. But actually that's only the canvas, you know. You then want to think about other things. And then there are specific things which you need to find out about. So tradition is not enough, you need to be curious. And curiosity is not something which is taught in academies of music, certainly not in Britain. When you come to a question about area, you'd ask your teacher, and he would say, "We usually do it like this."
Exactly.
You know, that's how you do it. You know, and you say, you ask him, for instance, what does a fermata mean? He said, "You just stop." Well, a fermata can mean a lot of other things. You know, it usually means a diminuendo, for instance, in Mozart and Haydn, probably in Beethoven. It also might mean the cadenza. So it's got quite a few other meanings. And then you ask him, you know, so what does andante mean? What does andante really mean? He said, just slow. Well, it doesn't mean slow. It means actually almost the opposite. It means move along. You know? So these things, they're not questioned, and you need to be curious. So if early music has done anything, it has made people a bit more curious. Yes.
Yes.
With Schumann, for instance, I remember hearing Schumann symphonies when I was young, and I was puzzled. They sounded so thick and turgid and difficult. And then if you read about them anywhere, it says Schumann's a very bad orchestrator. You know, he just can't really write for an orchestra. And so when we reached Schumann with the London Classical Players in the 80s, late 80s, the first page that we played, suddenly it just sounded wonderful, because it was a small orchestra, his orchestra he was used to, playing at the speeds which he asked for, and of course without vibrato, because then there's a clarity of texture which just suits the music so well. And as soon as you have a very big orchestra, far too many strings, 14, 16, and poor little wind going, then you've got imbalance and thickness. And as soon as you play with a period orchestra, bingo. And I remember when we did our first Schumann in concert in London, and the Times the next morning said, so Schumann was an orchestrator of genius, or so we heard last night. And of course we didn't do anything, we just played the music. So curiosity is really helpful, and if you think you know how to do it, then think again. That's really important. You know.